and you get 3. This column only has a single 1 digit with a value of 4, so the total is 4. But this column has 2 of the 1 digits with values of 1 and 4, so the total is 5. Here we have values of 2 and 4 for a total of 6, and here we have a value of 1, 2, and 4 for a total of 7. Now for this number they did something very interesting. Instead of showing a value of 8 in this row, they have a dot or a 1 digit at the beginning of the next column over. They did that to show how the dots for large numbers do not have to be in a single column, and that additional dots can be continued in subsequent columns. The dot in this column indicates a value of 8. In these 2 columns we have a value of 8 plus 1 for a total of 9. And in these columns we have a value of 8 plus 2 for a total of 10. You can now see how the numbers of 1 through 10 can be represented by dots and spaces. These columns represent the numbers 1, 6, 7, 8, and 15. When you look these numbers up in the periodic table of elements, you find that they represent the atomic numbers for hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and phosphorus, which are the basic elements for life. These numbers represent formulas for sugars and bases in nucleotides of DNA. And this long series of dots and spaces represents the number of nucleotides in DNA, which is 4,294,966,110. Finally, these curved lines represent the double helix of DNA. So, the simple dots and spaces of this portion of the message describes the entire composition of man. This is the lower portion of the Arecibo message. A human being is depicted here. These dots represent the number 14, which indicates mankind's height. And this very large number of dots and spaces represent the value of 33,811,972,094, which happens to have been the population of Earth in 1974. These dots here represent the planets of our solar system around the Sun, which is depicted by this large square. Then you have Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Notice how the symbol for Earth is higher than the rest to indicate where mankind lives. Finally, we have what looks like a rainbow over the letter M, but actually it is a depiction of the Arecibo telescope. The middle of the M is where radio energy is bounced off of the dish and then out into space. The dots and spaces at the bottom represent the number 9,598, which indicate the diameter of the telescope's dish. On August 19, 2001, just 5 days after the crop formation of the giant face appeared, and in the very same field as the face, this latest formation appeared near the 80-foot radio telescope at Chilbolton in England. It is 75 feet wide and 120 feet long. Look carefully. Doesn't this glyph look like another design that you have seen before? This pictogram is actually very similar to the Arecibo message that was sent out into space 27 years before this latest formation and this face appeared. However, there are some very interesting subtle differences between the two. This is the layout of the crop circle message with horizontal and vertical grid lines added to make it easier to see each dot and space. The dots and spaces here are the exact same binary representations of the decimal numbering system as it appeared in the Arecibo message. However, this pattern is different, while these patterns are the same. These curved lines are also the same, but these straight lines are different, and everything else is different. However, it all directly relates to what was sent in the Arecibo message of 1974. Now, let's take a closer look at how these two messages are different. This is the Arecibo message, and this is the Gibraltar message with grid lines added. As I said before, these dots of our numbering system are identical. However, there are some subtle differences in the rest of the message. Let's examine what those differences are. This dot pattern in the new message is slightly different from the old one. These dots originally represented the atomic numbers for the building blocks of life as we know it. But this new pattern has an extra column of dots that relate to the atomic number of 14, which is the element silicon. Does this mean that whoever designed this message has silicon in the makeup of their DNA? It is interesting that these dots, which represent formulas for the sugars and bases in the nucleotides of DNA, are the same in the new message. I guess this means that we got it right. However, the new message has a space in this long dot pattern, which represents the number of nucleotides in DNA. That causes the number to be decreased by 262,034. And instead of a double helix symbol, as represented in the old message, this side of the new message has a triple helix symbol. But the most interesting dot pattern of all is where instead of a depiction of a human being, as presented in the old message, the new message has a different depiction of a humanoid form. This new depiction shows a body with 2 arms and legs like humans, but the head is much bigger. And this pattern here, which represents the height of the body, has a value of 8 instead of a value of 14 that the old message indicated was the height of man. This would indicate that this other body is a little taller than half our height. And this dot pattern in the new message, which represents population, is also different from the old message. It indicates a population that is almost 6.5 billion larger than our own. Now let's examine these dot patterns here. The dots in the Arecibo message represented the 9 planets around the Sun. These long lines indicated the relative size of the planets. Notice how this dot, which represents Earth, is above all of the others in order to indicate where humanity lives. Also notice how Earth's dot is located directly below that of the depiction of man. In the new message, there are 3 dots that are raised above the rest. They refer to the planets of Earth, Mars, and Jupiter. However, it is the dot for Mars that is located directly below the humanoid body. Does this mean that the designers of this message come from Mars? In addition to the dots for Earth and Mars, notice how there are 4 dots that represent Jupiter, which also appear to be elevated to the same height. But instead of just representing Jupiter as a straight line, as in the case with Saturn, which is roughly the same size, there are 4 dots forming a circle. Jupiter is too big with too much gravity to support life. However, there are 4 moons around Jupiter that are roughly the same size as our moon. They are known as Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. Could these 4 dots mean that there is life on those moons as well? Getting back to the layout for the 2 messages, we see that the entire lower portion of the new message is different from the old message. The old message had a depiction of the Arecibo telescope that sent the original message. Doesn't this pattern remind you